So, welcome, friends of the planet. Monica here, and we are thrilled to have with us a dear friend of mine, a good friend of the planet, Aulani Wilhelm, who's the Senior Vice President for Ocean Conservation at Conservation International. And her work there bridges culture and community and science and innovation. And she's played a pivotal role in the creation and shaping of large scale marine reserves and marine parks for almost her entire career. She's led the design and establishment of one of the most important ones in the US. It's called Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument in Hawaii. And she was the founder of something called the Big Ocean Alliance, a network of the largest marine reserves all around the world. And now she's at CI. So we're thrilled to have her with us today. Welcome, Aulani.
Thanks so much. It's great to see you guys. I can't wait till we see each other in person again someday.
I'm looking forward to that. So, Conservation International has a long history in ocean conservation and particularly in marine protected areas. Tell us about what you've done in your career. I described a little bit of it. Tell us also why CI has been so involved for so long in the creation of marine protected areas and marine reserves.
CI, Conservation International, has been involved in marine protection for nearly 30 years and conservation, starting with some of our early country programs in Latin America, like Costa Rica and Colombia. Also, lots of work in Indonesia and the Philippines. I spent most of my career looking at conservation from the outside, coming from first community-based efforts to help to protect things in Hawaii, places in Hawaii, and also working for NOAA at the time to really lead that work with Papahanaumokuakea. And, I always thought of Conservation International as a marine organization because that's who I always interfaced with, mostly in the Pacific. And I joined Conservation International understanding that work and just realizing actually it's a small part of what we do now, increasingly bigger and bigger. But it's one of the organizations that has made really a commitment to marine protected areas. And I can take no credit for that. I've been here 5 years and this has been going on for a long time. And even when attention was turning and saying and pivoting away, there was a period in time where philanthropy shifted, it kind of flattened out, or maybe even started to decrease in terms of place-based work, more moving into other important work like fisheries. It's not that that's a bad thing to invest in, but you saw these shifts. And Conservation International had a real decision to make, right? Was it going to put a stake in the ground and just kind of go forward with marine protected areas and place-based work? Or were we also going to kind of move where the community was moving in many ways into fisheries? And we decided to do both and to continue to remain committed. And part of that is because I think CI has been involved in new experimentation, right? Before just like thinking about coastal MPAs, that was the thing. Then it was like, oh, these MPAs are kind of small. Maybe we should network them, right? Let's get them talking. Let's share knowledge. Let's look at connectivity, right? At a mostly coastal area. So then emerged this idea of like seascapes, right? And CI really has pushed this idea of, okay, well, what does that mean? It means a patchwork of where might there be important places that you really have to protect? Where are places that you have to or protect for biodiversity reasons? Other places that you have to protect for economic reasons because they're important tourism areas or for abundant and robust fisheries or whatever the economic needs are, and where are really important for community-based fisheries, right? For food or for aquaculture. So that really pushed us into looking at sustainable development and the intersection of wider seascapes and bringing in the private sector, bringing in communities, bringing in science, bringing in conservation efforts together, right? And then it kind of grew again. And there was this thing called the Pacific Oceanscape where you really worked with countries to look at their entire exclusive economic zones. So I think, CI has this history of continuing to try to emerge and build new models to see how we can extend and have greater impact with a real emphasis on learning. And so I'm proud to be part of this organization. It's part of why I came to CI after, working in the field, because it mirrors a lot of what I think I've seen in my career that's really important. There's no panacea. We need all the solutions kind of everywhere, and we need them to match the context of the places.
I think of all the times that we've talked about the traditional knowledge that you bring to your job and that indigenous communities bring. And, the voyage of the Hokulea, this incredible group of young people who sailed in honor of what their ancestors had done. I mean, you talked about the scale of things in the Pacific. Talk about how we can learn from that as we look at ocean conservation.
It's as much about indigenous ways of knowing, which, I only know, shreds of what my ancestors knew. And I've learned from so many incredible teachers that kind of community of knowledge is generational, right? It's passed down on, it's challenged. And thank you for connecting the two. A lot of people say, what can we, take or use from traditional or indigenous knowledge? And they forget the people that are holding it or have continued to hold it. You can't have one without the other. So what we're really talking about is engagement of indigenous peoples, communities, individuals into the thought process and the design. And that's really about how do you hold the planet? That relationship sense, the sense of kinship, the understanding that's really opposite of a dominion kind of culture of humans having superiority or somehow we have magical solutions that we're going to take care of the planet, right? I think it's coming full force in our faces with the pandemic. If nothing's going to teach us that, maybe this will. We have very little control, right? So I think it's a set of cultural perspectives that understand that. And then thinks about generations. Whatever indigenous community you talk to, there's either they look at things 3, 4, 7, 100 generations out. We think about quarterly returns. We think about 4-year political cycles. And in that way, it's really hard to then think generationally. But that's where engagement of people with this kind of view is really important because it helps ask those questions that really kick the tires on whether forever is possible. Otherwise, you're not talking about forever. You're talking about ribbon cutting. You're talking about a political cycle. You're talking about maybe a generation, right? So I think that is what the importance of engaging people who hold those perspectives and who have direct relationship to place. And if we think that even the open ocean doesn't have that, we're actually wrong. The more we're looking at it, you look at the Sargasso Sea, there's Celtic poems from the 4th century about the Sargasso Sea. Who would have thought? People have been connected. The planet's actually quite small when you think about that. So the other thing I'd say about it that is also helpful is an island thinking. We have to think about the planet as an island, right? With limited resources, and we don't. So I think islander mindsets and indigenous people, even if you're not on an island, I happen to be oriented that way. Indigenous people in forests, in many ways, those are islands too. They're separated by trees and big plains or plateaus, right? They're almost isolated communities. So you think within your means, right? You think about what does it take to really live connected and to make sure that you're looking out, right? That you're seeing small changes that when you get a little further are going to be big, and being willing to make adjustments early, right? That's another mentality that I think we have to really learn from and ask ourselves in order to have better solutions. So place, connection, multi-generation, as well as very, very grounded in the idea that we live with limited resources.